very easy.
You may feel free to snap, or you may feel free to make other terrible noises with your mouth holes, or what
are you doing?
You make family farms together like a piece.
Excellent. All those Republicans, are you ready to begin the debate? Absolutely right. You may begin in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Please begin.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen, and any gender-neutral individuals or individuals who have genders that are neither gender-neutral nor lady nor gentlemen. There are a lot of options, and that's something we're going to be talking a lot about in the debate tonight. I'm Forrest Taylor. I'm here to represent the college Republicans in this debate that is on PC culture, and we have several different topics, as most of you likely know. Our positions on most of these topics are fairly simple. Do you mind if I describe them real quick? All right. Basically, well, that's true. That's very un-PC. With transgender rights, we're mostly going to be talking about how these are issues that are largely used by politicians to score social points, both social conservatives and social liberals. But more often than not, these laws don't do a lot to actually help individuals struggling in the real world. In fact, they may cause more harm than they do good. I would say they definitely do. For Section 2, racial and cultural appropriation, that we're looking forward to is more of a discussion with the young Democrats. We don't really know what position they're going to take, as far as I know, and it's just going to be a very interesting time with that one. Section 3, free speech versus hate speech. We are generally going to be making the case that hate speech is not an actual legal category in US law. There is a long, long history of First Amendment protection of free speech with very clear and limited defined things that are not protected by free speech. And that's from 1791 up to today. So we're looking forward to talking about that and figuring out, but we will not be addressing the concept of hate speech as even possibly being a legal matter that should be banned, because that is not in line with existing law or the tradition of liberalism in a more small L liberalism sense that has gone back to the foundation of America and long before that. In closing, because that's all I really had to say for introductions, unless you want. Lovely. I'd like to say a quick quote that hopefully I think all of us can agree with. Remember, always give your best, never get discouraged, never be petty. Always remember, others may hate you, but those who hate you won't win unless you hate them, and then you destroy yourself. And that quote, of course, is from the late, great Richard Nixon. Thank you. I'm glad he's alive now.
The candidate on stage acceptable.
Lovely.
1 moment. And Democrats,
Snap your fingers, dude.
in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Please begin.
Hello everyone, my name is Grace Arcel, and I'll be representing the Young Democrats in this debate. I'm going to start out with just a general explanation of what we define PC culture as. The PC culture that we think exemplifies respecting one another's existence and understanding the historical oppression in the United States and its manifestations to this day. This is one of the fundamental values that the U.S. was founded on. All persons should be created equal, but we have a long way to go to realizing this goal. The U.S. has been historically known for actively discriminating against people by skin color, gender, sexual orientation, citizen status, socioeconomic status, and religion. PC culture in the university to us means acknowledging your privilege, listening to marginalized people, allowing everyone a safe space to learn and to thrive, and learning When the college Republicans inevitably bring up the most extreme examples of political correctness stretching too far, we must realize that these outliers are vastly outweighed by the prevention of much more frequent bigoted speech and action. In short, the net benefits of engaging in respect and empathy at the university level far outweigh the minimal efforts needed to adjust your speech or actions. The end goal for us, and ultimately equalize historically marginalized voices by providing the environment where people feel respected and empowered to participate at the University of Washington.
Thank you, young Democrats. We will now move into our first topic on transgender rights. As a reminder, please be sure to pass in any questions you have during the debate, either to myself or my colleague, and I believe that we will have someone going around gathering them up. I don't know who, but hopefully they know who they are. To that end, make sure that you save your questions for the 10-minute period, during which we will switch between Democrats and Republicans. Seeing as the Democrats just spoke, I will be happy to invite our Republican allies in order to speak for the next 5 minutes when you're ready.
Yeah, let's do this.
Awesome.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you once again for joining us in what I hope will turn out to be a friendly and thought-provoking discussion tonight on issues that are very sensitive to some people here. So, in general, our contention is that the worst thing that we can do the worst solution that we can find to the discrimination against people who consider themselves transgender is to bring legislation into it, or to bring laws into it that will supposedly help these people. Because as you know, or as we know at least, there really is no such thing as a one-size-fits-all solution for this problem. And if what we're seeing in North Carolina is any indication of how it turns out, is that introducing legislation, regardless of who it protects, always deepens the divide between transgender and cis people. But we also want to point out that the population of transgender people in the United States doesn't even make up an entire percentage point. So this is a small enough group of people that we can work with on a case-by-case basis, rather than just throwing a blanket solution, legislation, over the problem. So what we advocate are bottom-up initiatives to help transgender people exclusively on the basis of what university they go to, where they work, rather, like I said again, just introducing a one-size-fits-all solution. But and lastly, what we want to point out is that introducing legislation and regulations is what it does, is it categorizes and labels people who are transgender, which is the last thing that should be happening for a topic that is this sensitive. And Forrest, if you want to jump in with the legal specifics.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd be happy to talk about it. I thought a really perspicacious quote that is very, very relevant to this issue was said by Washington State Senator Steve Litzow, who said, "Legislation to create more uncertainty and reduce the rights of any minority does more to divide us than bring equality." I very much agree with that. One thing that is really important in this case is we're talking about, I think we should focus on Washington state law, since we're all Washingtonians here, I believe, and that's the thing we can most affect. That's at least what I've done most of my research into. There were a lot of changes recently made in terms of Washington state law regarding sexual identity and gender identity. One of the most important changes was discussing locker rooms, bathrooms, and the like. A lot of you may know these as bathroom bill. This was the recent law. The law specifically says that institutions that are covered under the law can no longer request or require individuals to use separate or gender-neutral facilities if they do not have a restroom of their gender. This is a perfect sort of example of big government solutions that make things harder both for transgender people and for the businesses trying to support them. Because you can no longer request or provide a gender-neutral facility. That is now illegal under WCW 162-32-060. The problem with something like this is, you now basically, if you're trying to meet the letter of the law, and that is what we're talking about here, the letter of the law, you have to basically continue to construct additional bathrooms for everyone who requests one or need one. Let's say I run a YMCA, which is very relevant as that's the business that started this issue. If I have someone who's joined the YMCA who is genderqueer, and I want to welcome them in, but I don't have a restroom space or a locker room specifically for genderqueer people, I have to build one now, because I cannot request or require an individual to use a separate or gender-neutral facility. Well, that's just fine, I'm sure I can provide space. But let's say another individual joins who is agender. That is another bathroom, because again, you cannot request or require an individual to use a separate or gender-neutral facility or one, thank you, that doesn't fit their perceived gender identity. I'm all in support of that, but when we're legislating these issues down, tweens and teens are better served by bottom-up initiatives that serve them specifically, rather than these overburdensome big government initiatives that try to define and regulate their gender identity. I don't want to regulate gender. I think people should be able to explore that for themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
You might come.
You got in exactly 1 second before class.
Beautiful.
With that in mind, I will be happy to ask that the Democrats begin on their remarks.
Hi, I'm Zane, and thank you all for coming as well. I think that within Washington, a very liberal state that has voted blue for multiple presidential elections in the past, legislation is going to necessarily look very different, even when you're dealing with areas like Seattle versus areas like Spokane or the Tri-City area. And when my colleague Forrest talks about bottom-up versus top-down initiatives, I think an important thing to note is that bottom-up initiatives won't happen in states that are controlled by conservatives. They will not happen, they have not happened, and this is extremely important when you have statistics that transgender individuals are incredibly more likely to be assaulted by police officers, to be assaulted by other individuals, and their cases are much less likely to be brought to trial or to result in conviction. Over 73% of all hate crimes and murders are against trans individuals. And I think that when you look at these statistics, it's important to note that this is even if they represent a small minority of the populace, it's important to note that these are incredibly at-risk individuals that experience oppression on a daily basis and a material basis. And I think that also when my colleague Forrest brings up ideas like, you know, we could the wording of this new Washington law could mean that you have to build facilities for any different gender orientation or self-representation. That is, first of all, very unlikely to actually be the case. I don't think there's any case of that actually happening. And also language that finally brings out issues that have not been addressed and, as I said before, have material consequences for the individuals that it affects is a really important thing. It's important that we bring this conversation to politics and to both state and the federal level. And I think that when I look at the way we should deal with a lot of trans issues is specifically providing a legal pathway for people to deal with assault and other crimes against them, so that which don't exist right now, and I especially don't exist in places that are conservative. So I think that it's a really important issue that needs to be addressed within our laws because it has not been addressed at all in our society as we stand here today.
Is that concludes my time? Thank you. Please send any questions from the audience down to us lovely, beautiful, and eloquent debaters.
By the way, while we're collecting questions, I neglected to say earlier, and I feel like I should remedy that. I usually say it with my introductions, but I was focusing more on introducing the topics this time. I'm Forrest Taylor. My pronouns are he and him. I'm not sure if we have any transgender people debating tonight, but I find it a little problematic if, and I just think we should be aware of that, if we're discussing, as we both agree, a really underrepresented group that isn't allowed to have their voice at the table. And I think it's really important for those marginalized groups to be able to have a voice at the table. So at no point do I want to make it seem like I'm speaking for all transgender people or that I'm even speaking for all cisgender people. These are complicated, nuanced issues that the individuals should be, basically they should, I'm now talking over my time, so that's how.
Yes, thank you, sir. Okay.
This one's specifically addressed to the Democrats.
Okay, we have one for the Democrats, and I have one for the Republicans.
Okay. All right, Democrats. So will your increased legislation help reduce the prejudiced nature towards transgender persons in conservative areas? So you talked about increasing legislation in conservative areas. Will that increased legislation help to reduce the prejudiced nature towards transgender persons in those conservative areas?
So we must start with legislation to be able to build a discourse around supporting all persons of all genders. We have to start with this legislation in all areas of the country, conservative or not, because it doesn't matter what your political leaning is. There are agender, transgender, a full spectrum of genders in our communities, and we can't just assume that everyone abides by a binary standard. We must leave space for the kindness and respect for all persons of all genders, and starting with legislation is the first step to do so.
Yeah, I would also like to say that if you provide a legal pathway for people that identify along the gender spectrum and non-binary people along the gender spectrum, then that finally creates a way for these people who experience historical injustice to deal with these on a case-by-case basis as well, as Forrest mentioned earlier in his opening statements.
Thank you, Democrats. Republicans, do you have a rebuttal? Please keep it to 30 seconds.
I'll take it. This is a perfect example of the sort of big government initiatives that stop actually people from being able to face these not historical injustices. These are injustices that are happening now, and acting as if they're simply historical injustices in the past is frankly insulting to trans people, I would say. Now, it's important that everyone, if we try to start with these federal top-down legislations, then we'll completely okay, I'm out of time.
Thank you.
I'll do better next time. So,
We do not. Excellent. In that case, you will have 30 seconds starting now. Please rebut.
Excuse me, I did not mean only historical oppression. I, of course, understand that there are very real violences that are happening to transgender people today, and that is something that will be addressed through legislation.
Excellent. Thank you.
sorry.
As the Republican debate chair, I have a question for the Republicans, and you may feel free to rebut as you wish, Democrats. Earlier in one of your speeches, you made the point that trans individuals make up less than 1% of people in the United States. First of all, does the number of individuals in question affect or change the need that we have for legislation? And second of all, according to Petra Doan, professor of geography at Florida State University, The actual number is considerably higher, ranging at 3.95%, or 9,600,000 individuals within the United States who identify as transgender. How does this affect your point and your arguments as a whole? Please respond.
Well, the number of people doesn't mean that the situation is any less severe and that a group of people is suffering any less. But our point still stands in that there is a right way and a wrong way to go about it. And we firmly believe that the wrong way is to introduce legislation because it not only addresses the problems that transgender people have, but what it does is it brings many other groups into it. Some people who may be opposed to the whole idea. Put simply, it pins people against each other when it's obviously not what we need.
Exactly. Whether it's most of the things we were able to find, 538 claims the number is 0.3%. I've seen numbers that go to 0.5%. That's very interesting. I hadn't heard the 3.9% figure, and I certainly hadn't heard the figure that the Democrats cited, where 73% of all hate crimes are against trans people, and I would love to hear your source for that. I was under the impression that there are also a lot of hate crimes directed on a racial basis, directed on a gender basis, and of course I've been a victim of a hate crime that was on a sexual orientation basis. So that's very surprising that 73% of all hate crimes are against trans people. But as I always say, if I'm shot by a bullet in only less than 1% of my body, that doesn't make me any less able to die. It doesn't matter how small the minority is. In fact, the individual is the smallest minority that we must defend. And anyone who isn't fighting for individual.
Democrats, do you have a rebuttal?
Yeah, our source is the National Institute of Justice. So.
73% is what the National
Excuse me.
73% is what the National Institute of Justice says.
It says over 6 out of 10. Rape.
Yeah, and so, well, 2/3 of hate crimes and murders were committed against trans individuals.
That's shocking.
And I think this actually includes trans individuals and individuals that identify in LGBTQIA+. So that's actually that's misspoken.
Thanks.
Thank you, Democrats. Republicans, do you have a final rebuttal?
Oh, as a rebuttal? No, thank you for saying where you got that.
Thanks, Matt. I believe you have any questions.
This one here is for the Democrats. So you talked about laws earlier. What specific laws or legislation would you suggest?
I think that a good start would be to include trans individuals within language of the Equal Rights Act, as well as anti-discrimination policy, because that language has been excluded almost completely from almost all laws in the United States. So I think, first of all, recognizing their existence is probably important. And then after that, I would say that targeting policy that specifically addresses issues that the transgender community would be a good start.
And additionally, within the university, making it easier for transgender people to change their pronouns within the system is vital to supporting our people, period.
Thank you. That is time. The Republicans, would you like to rebut?
Your first policy recommendation is actually a
Please do not keep comments when they are not appropriate. Thank you. We will ask you to leave. Republicans, would you like to rebut?
Yeah, I can mention, that's what we just discussed. Well, yes, it is true that Donald Trump has endorsed that change, so it looks like that's pretty, sorry. So I think that can absolutely be done with a bipartisan task force. I mean, when we're talking about changing that much federal law, we're also talking about changing some of Title IX requirements, and I think that's very important as well. I have 5 seconds, but I think bipartisan we can come up with yeah, I agree. I think we can do that.
Thank you. Democrats, would you like to rebut? It's okay to say no.
No.
Okay, thank you. Seeing as we do not have audience questions for the Republicans.
No, it's not Republican.
Any questions for Democrats? Please pass them down. Fourth right.
For the Republicans.
Nikhil, sit closer.
Nikhil, please sit closer, because you might be of Senate.
Okay, so at least my question is, in terms of the whole matter of discrimination, there's been a lot of comparisons between transgender discrimination laws or anti-transgender discrimination laws and civil rights anti-discrimination laws. Do you support at least the principles of the Civil Rights Act of 1964? If so, do you believe that transgender rights are equivalent to the protections in that law? If not, do you believe that those laws should be repealed? Thank you.
And this question is for the Republicans?
Yes.
Yes.
I absolutely support the Civil Rights Act of 1964. I believe it was mostly Republicans who passed that law through, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, naturally I support that. I think the Civil Rights Act is a great, I see no reason why it shouldn't be expanded. Obviously, again, these are like difficult and lengthy questions that I can't get into within 30 seconds, but in the spirit of your question, yeah, I see no trouble with that. It's a great Republican law that can be even further expanded.
Thank you, sir. That is fine.
I would like to point out that the
Is
Civil
this
Rights
a rebuttal?
Yes, I would like to point out that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed under Lyndon B. Johnson, and it was also passed under the most efficient time of democratic legislation in the history of the country, along with Great Society programs. So,
Is that the conclusion of your vote?
yes.
Republicans, do you want to rebut that rebuttal? No. Excellent. I'm glad that you don't like butts.
We have another question addressed to the Democrats. So this looks, this is, quote, okay. If we are to accommodate all genders, as you said, where should we start and end? Where should it start and end? How many genders are there?
How many time do you rebut?
Can we get a question?
Sure. Alright. If we are to accommodate all genders, as you said, where should it start and end? How many genders are there?
I think that there's no point defining what number of genders there can be. I think that it's important to, first of all, understand that gender doesn't exist as a binary, which I think that most of the U.S. actually probably doesn't understand. And I would also like to say that there is, I don't understand what the question means when what should the end be, because I just can't really comment on that. So.
Oh yes, rebut?
Yes, I'll do it. I'm going to channel Joseph McCarthy for a second and say that I have here in my hand a list of 58 different gender identities. But I will not be reading them, much like Joseph McCarthy never read his list. I agree with the Democrats. Gender is a spectrum. There are a lot of names for things, and I think everyone should be able to explore their own gender identity, which is exactly why we shouldn't start legislating all these different names and all these different genders. I think it provides a censorious effect on tweens and teens who are just trying to figure this stuff out in their lives. Their lives are hard enough already. We shouldn't make it harder.
Thank you, Democrats. You have my
I think language like transgender encompasses a very wide variety of specific identities. So I think that is a great way to start.
Thank you.
Do you have a question for me?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Excellent. My question is for the Republicans, and I believe it is very simple. As a transgender person myself, I'm confused by your point about the deepening of the distinction between cisgender and transgender individuals, especially your point as to legislation deepening that divide. My question is very simple then. How can you, as cisgender individuals, choose or decide what deepens or strengthens or even weakens the connections between transgender individuals? And secondly, if it has such a detrimental effect, why is it transgender individuals who are pushing for legislative changes to these effects? I will begin time with you, but
Oh, yes, absolutely. We absolutely think that transgender people should be leading the conversation as they have a right to. That means local initiatives from the bottom up, not the top down. There are no, to my knowledge, elected representatives in the Senate, in the House, in the executive branch who are transgender. I would love hearing if that's different. But as the issue stands, this is cis people legislating trans people's existence, and that's not something I can support.
okay, is that it now? Okay, yes it is. Democrats, do you have a rebuttal to their point? Yes, you do.
Yeah, I think that the first thing to note is that trans people in conservative communities will never get their voices heard if they start on a local level. Also, there's probably a reason why trans people are not represented in the legislation. That's because of systematic oppression. And that needs to be changed in legislation that is advocated for by trans individuals, even if they are not in office, to try to change it.
Additionally, it is not the responsibility of the oppressed peoples to change the world for themselves. Everyone should be binding together. Allies, cisgender people, transgender people should be binding together to aid the rising up of transgender people in our legislative system.
Thank you. One moment, we have some topic. Republicans, would you like to add or about anything in that statement?
Yeah, just briefly, and maybe I misheard you, but I'm not sure if you said transgendered people. I believe being transgender is something you are, not something that happens to you. Saying transgender is much like saying someone is gay or they're blacked. So I don't love that language, but of course you're free to use whatever language you want. Was there anything else in that statement? I think we mostly agree with that.
As a note, I am transgender. I believe that we have time for one more question.
Yeah, we're gonna hold any further questions on this. We just have the ones here. You have?
Some directions that the Dems and you can find them. Yeah. So, if you insist on legislation considering the small population, large gender variety, wouldn't it be more efficient and less polarizing to legislate the addition of gender-neutral restrooms than to force integration and help prevent hate crimes, or should we have a bathroom legislated for each gender? Yeah. If you insist on legislation considering the small population and large gender variety, wouldn't it be more efficient and less polarizing to legislate the addition of gender-neutral restrooms than to force integration and help prevent hate crimes, or should we have a bathroom legislated for each gender?
So I'll begin on this. Maybe we failed to define the word transgender, but transgender is not synonymous with agender or gender neutral. So I think we should make a distinction between them. You can be a transgender woman and you should have all the rights in the world to use the women's restroom. So we shouldn't just assign a transgender bathroom. That's highly oppressive and it erases people's genders and their identities in the long run.
And it does exactly what my colleague Cora said, is that it projects them in the community, and that's might not be what they want.
Republicans, do you have a rebuttal?
Do you want to take this one? I've been out for a while.
As you often are.
I usually am, yeah. I did want to mention really quick, and this is actually a thing I forgot to rebut earlier, but I don't really like the infantilizing of trans people in conservative circles. And people may know I come from Texas. There have been, in Dallas, in Fort Worth, and in Austin, there have been several successful convictions of people for anti-transgender hate crimes. So I don't think it's true to say that trans people in